What is going on, everyone? It's Justin here, and welcome back to another episode of the Feature Podcast. And if you guys remember in the introduction, I mentioned that some of the topics we were going to be covering is the side of business, media, and technology, and everything kind of combined all together. And today we have a very special guest, Ian Borthwick, also known as Ian from SeatGeek, who I believe covers many of these categories. SeatGeek, of course, is a very tech-focused company that also lives in the world of influencer marketing. It's also part of one of the most successful social media campaigns, in my opinion, thanks to Ian. As you guys might see in the David Dobrik vlogs, it has almost become sort of a character. Every time there is something exciting that is happening or a car that is given away, it is more than likely thanks to SeatGeek. And if you guys go ahead and follow him over on Twitter, I find that he has some of the best opinions towards social media marketing based on articles and numbers on the internet. So without further ado, let's just go ahead and get started.
The story just is we wanted to work with them for a long time, and he wanted to do a deal with us for the World Series. He wanted to surprise his best friend with tickets. And when I sent him over the talking points, he said, not going to do it. And that is like, if you're a marketer, it's like this weird position because on one hand, you have the great white buffalo. On the other hand, you are really scared because you're spending a lot of money and relatively a lot of money to sponsor someone. And you really don't want to go back to your boss and say, yeah, we did it, but it didn't work.
We have Ian Borthwick joining us, also known as Ian from SeatGeek.
What's up, everyone? Excited to be here. I'm ready to talk influencer marketing or whatever you got.
Yeah. So when did you start at SeatGeek and kind of like your experience in the marketing world and that story?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think I definitely had a non-traditional past. I had that moment I think a lot of college kids have where they realize what they're majoring in has nothing to do with what they want to actually do. I don't know if you had that or you felt that, but I had a moment where I knew I wasn't going to be a government major and actually ended up going into sports.
Really?
And then, so I worked for a sports agency for about 3 years called Wasserman Media Group, who represents a lot of athletes across the NBA, a couple NFL players, a lot of soccer players. And I think I realized at an agency, you're kind of stuck in some ways in between, which is a valuable position, but it's also a tough place where you have, an athlete and then a brand, and how do you kind of like fit that together? And I ultimately wanted to go to the brand side. So I joined SeatGeek 5 years ago, actually. And I really we were having some success in podcasts. We were one of the first podcast advertisers, and I noticed actually a guy from work was like, you should see these FIFA gamers. They're like getting all these views. And I kind of laughed at him because I don't know, at first I was like, FIFA gamers, like where does that? But then I started thinking about it. And if you have 200,000 people plus watching your videos, you have an audience. And so, but FIFA wasn't the right fit for us because we weren't an international company. So we ended up partnering with NBA 2K gamers. And that was kind of like how I got in to the space. About 4 years ago, we were doing, 3 to 4 videos a month. Right before COVID, we were doing 150 videos a month. So for us, influencer marketing is a major part of what SeatGeek does.
Yeah, for sure. I know obviously the most well-known story is like the story of the David Dobrik thing, but I also obviously have been following you on Twitter for a while and noticed that you tweet a lot of the stuff that people who know influencer marketing would think like, well, it's true. And a lot of times there's always misconceptions thrown around in the industry. And I know it's changed very fast and evolved rather quickly in the last 5 years, especially from what I've seen. But in my case, I went to university for business, which was kind of the area of interest that I had, but I just felt like it was really behind. And especially in the marketing course, they were talking about forms of marketing and they would talk about the 5 Ps and that kind of stuff. But when they got to influencer marketing, it was one slide in the entire term on the bottom corner of a 30 slide deck. and YouTube wasn't even included as a form of social media marketing. It was like LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and that kind of stuff. So I just felt like at that point it was I was going into the fourth year. It was time to just leave. I couldn't really travel, and I was kind of working on weekends and trying to do the school stuff during the daytime. So yeah, it's I think that was like sort of where I noticed it was really behind. The story of David Dobrik, was it like a traditional way of integration at the time you started doing that? And what have you learned the most from it? And how hard was it to convince sometimes like the higher ups in the marketing department to go with a new strategy that you see?
Like, I think to your point, there's what you learn in college and university is going to just be behind maybe where the eight ball is now. And so as a marketer, luckily the way SeatGeek looked at it is like, we're a challenger brand, right? We're not the biggest ticketing company yet. We're a startup that is now an early stage company, and it's really hard to compete against the biggest brands in the world head on. So if we're going to jump on Google AdWords and bid against Ticketmaster, StubHub, it's going to be an expensive game to play. But the game we want to play, and we know that we have a competitive advantage in, is working with people like you, where they don't quite get this world. They don't understand. They don't want to deal with the emails, the text messages, the relationships. Everyone wants to just log into a platform right now and do marketing. So I think there's a real competitive advantage for these brands that think differently. And for us, we knew that influencer was the right angle early on, just because we saw what podcast was. And I'm a big believer in long form content. So I think podcast, YouTube is a natural transition, just because if someone's willing to listen to what you have to say, they really care about you. I don't think you quite get that connection on Instagram. So plus you get video, right? Like podcasts are just audio. You can combine the both of them on YouTube. So that's why I'm a big believer in YouTube. And what we did traditionally when we started out, we knew we had the right angle. We just had the wrong execution. And it was working, don't get me wrong. It was just we were doing a lot of deals, but the deals were very formulaic, and I was not leaning in, I'd say, to the influencers' creativity enough. So we had kind of more onerous talking points than we have now, where you have to say this, you have to show the app on screen, you really have to do it exactly how we want you to do it. And David changed that, mostly because he was such a big name that he had the power to force us to make that change, and it was for the better. So the story just is we wanted to work with them for a long time, and he wanted to do a deal with us for the World Series. He wanted to surprise his best friend with tickets, and when I sent him over the talking points, he said, "Not going to do it." And that is like if you're a marketer, it's like this weird position, because on one hand, you have the great white buffalo. On the other hand, you are really scared because you're spending a lot of money, and relatively a lot of money to sponsor someone, and you really don't want to go back to your boss and say, "Yeah, we did it, but it didn't work, or it didn't hit as much as we needed it to." And so that is why I was definitely in this nervous situation. But David kind of related it to, I think this is what we miss and what people don't get, is he said it's about the community, not really about your brand. And so that's how I view influencer marketing now, is it's between, you have a community of followers, and that's what the brand is trying to tap into, that link between you and your community. And the minute a brand starts to articulate how exactly, my dog is biting a bone in the corner and it's getting kind of loud. But the minute you start articulating exactly how you want an influencer to talk to their audience, I think, one, it's a little bit arrogant, assuming that like I know how to talk to your audience better than you can. And two, you're losing the entire authenticity, the entire purpose of doing it. So I think that's kind of what we learned out of David, and now we really try to lay into influencers' creativity.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's like what I found the most unique about SeatGeek's approach, because in the tech space, there's a lot of there's a lot of campaigns, and I would say almost all of them are in a situation where you're given a whole PDF of like, you have to cover this, you have to cover this certain spec, and then you're kind of trying to explain like, well, nobody really cares about the spec, they care about like this instead, or how it's used. And a lot of times there's always like that layer of pushback where the representative in the company would say, well, yeah, I agree with that, but somebody is telling me that this has to be done if we're going to be spending this kind of money, kind of thing. So I think that was very unique. And I actually was someone who started watching David a little bit later. I met him at Playlist and VidCon a few times at like the different parties and stuff, and I noticed that everybody was like, oh, they want to see David. So I went back home and I watched all the videos. I think it must have been 300 vlogs to catch up on. And I noticed like, yeah, like SeatGeek became like a character within the video. It wasn't just like an ad. It was a new character. And every time people knew like, oh, like, well, we want to surprise somebody with this and that, we knew SeatGeek was going to be a part of that. What do you think is like the biggest misconception of influencer marketing that you've seen? I know there's been like some articles out there and like people attacking this type of tactic, but a lot of times like numbers can speak for themselves. Or what's like the biggest misconception that you see like often floating around?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest misconception is people really, they don't understand kind of what they're buying or what brands who are doing influencers are actually buying. So they see, like, we'll take David, for example. So if David costs a lot of money to work with and they hear the numbers that it costs to do influencer marketing, and they think of it only in like this weird PR communication brand world where like you're not actually driving business results. You're just like promotion. And the problem with that is you really lose touch with kind of like what you're actually buying. So for David, or for any influencer, you're buying a creative agency, an actor, production, creative strategy, distribution, all in one price. And I think that's a big misconception is everyone gets caught up with influencer marketing, Instagram, how much, Kim Kardashian gets per Instagram post. And they think of it in just that vein. And they don't really think of it as this is a channel that right now can break through the clutter unlike any other channel. Like we get bombarded by ads. I talk about it a lot, but like I test my friends sometimes where like we'll be watching a game and back when there was sports and like close your eyes. It's really a weird trick that I do, but like I'll tell them close your eyes and name any of the brands that are on the court right now, or there's the commercials that just happened, and no one ever remembers any of it. And it's like that's $1 million deals, and people can't remember them.
Yeah.
But if I said name the sponsor of your favorite podcast, people can recite it word for word, or name the YouTube ad, or name like the brand that collaborates with your favorite YouTuber. They can name them. And I think like people get lost in this crazy idea of like impressions, but not like what are impressions that people actually remember. And that's like a big problem, just an old school marketing idea where like, oh, we only know 50% of the marketing that works. It's a very like, it's a crazy idea to me. And with YouTubers and podcasters, and I'll finish this rant, you just know, you're reaching an engaged audience. And that's like, people just lose touch of that and think about it just like Kim Kardashian, $1 million post or whatever she charges, and don't break it down to what it really is.
Yeah, for sure. I think like that kind of transitions into the question, like, is there still a stigma in social media marketing by a lot of brands out there, or has it gotten better? Have most of them transitioned? And like, what is like a good example of a company that was traditionally very much against it, but has quickly adapted to the influencer marketing kind of strategy?
I think the brands that are the best at it are, I think Honey does a great job. Honey and Mr. Beast, like that promotion. I don't know how much it was responsible, but Honey got bought for like billions of dollars. And like, I don't know how much we need to credit to Mr. Beast, but he needs some credit there. Like that is a brand that like hit the next level when they started doing influencer marketing. I'm a big fan of Cash App, and Cash App right now is about to surpass Venmo. Yeah, great podcast advertiser. They're starting to get into YouTube. They do Rogan. They do Part of My Take. And so what Cash App did is, I mean, Venmo had this massive lead over Cash App, and Cash App was able to use, and that's a great example of this, a company that Venmo got bought by PayPal and just became kind of a seemingly a stagnant company. And Cash App has just completely stolen their audience because they've been such effective marketers and primarily using influencers to do it. So those are like the companies that really stick out to me. In terms of an older school company, I think like Chipotle, I'm always impressed. They're kind of my rival in that we always submit for awards and they always beat us, but they are an incredibly good marketing team for being a public company. They did some really cool David collaborations that like they did this one TikTok one where like everyone was like flipping the lids on their burrito bowls. So I'm very impressed by Chipotle.
Yeah, I think we have seen like a big shift in the past couple years. I mean, when I started YouTube, it was probably like 2010, 2011. Obviously, I'm not like the biggest channel nowadays, but like as it's evolved into like the business side of things, back in 2015, I think a lot of the stuff was like very platform based, where you had to like the whole approval process and this and that, and then it became more open ended. We've seen like it kind of open up quite a bit. A lot of times, I think there's a big, you always see comments on the videos that are like, well, YouTube isn't a job, it's not a business, or this and that. What would you say to that as someone who works with some of the largest creators on the platform, as to how much work, and even not looking at just the like editing and filming and the time it takes for that, but the amount of time you're pretty much living a lifestyle that is adapted to creating content because you're thinking about it all day.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's this misconception that influencers just like go out, do fun things, chill, take a couple selfies, and then get paid. And like, I have never seen, I don't know, any influencers who do that. What I see is like truly the modern day entrepreneur where these people like yourself are betting on themselves and they're putting themselves out there every single day. And instead of going through a big media company where you work your way up and you have like kind of like all these different editors and all these different people to help, these are really like small production teams that are getting more exposure than top cable channels. And what's really exciting to me is you're seeing influencers starting to realize they have this audience that brands want. So brands are trying to become media companies right now because to have an engaged audience gives you like a very unfair advantage. And influencers have that audience already. So an influencer who has a massive audience can transition that to starting their own clothing brand, to starting their own makeup company. And then I think you're going to see more and more influencers starting their own brands because they have this very engaged audience behind them.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think examples of like there are a lot of creators nowadays that essentially have built most of their streams from the merchandise side. Milk Boys, for example. There's like a lot of different ways we've seen, depending on the industry, the way the influencer marketing kind of business is structured. There's like the entertainment side, and on the tech side, most of us don't make that much off of our AdSense. It's mainly off of sponsorships. Whereas in other industries, like for example, the Graham Stephan and how he always talks about like the potential in the kind of Amazon teaching tutorials and also like real estate advice, that kind of space. The CPMs are very different, and it's cool to see how creators in different spaces, as they grow, have adapted their business strategy based on which stream is the strongest. In tech, at least, clothing and merchandise is not a huge stream, which is why for my clothing brand that I co-own, it's like a completely separate thing. We sell locally to retailers. A business partner takes care of like distribution, and essentially we still use the platform to advertise it, but it's not like by any means a mainstream. Um, what do you have to say to brands that are overly strict about like scripts and captions? I know you like to use the term like banner ads a lot. You're essentially buying a banner ad. If you, what would you say to that? And like from a performance standpoint, how is it affecting the performance by being overly strict about all that?
Yeah, I mean, I think like people want the control of a TV commercial or a Instagram ad, but the authenticity of influencer marketing, and like that's a oxymoron. Like you're those scripts and that prescriptive approach is a very old school mindset where you need to control everything. But if you are buying influencer marketing, if the bet you are making, because it's more expensive than an Instagram ad, the bet that you are making is that the influencer is going to do outpunch its weight on a per impression basis. So per every view, people are going to remember you more because of that authenticity, because of that connection. And so if that's the bet you are making, once you start being overly prescriptive or overly staged, you are just like, you're undercutting the entire point. And so that's what I struggle with, is just, I see a lot of particular like Instagram or Twitter campaigns where like anybody who looks at this photo is like, this is the most staged thing of all time. And it's like, it's just a bummer, because like you have this incredible power and you're just kind of like too scared to push yourself to the next level and really like lean into the authenticity. Now, a lot of those brands are bigger brands because they're scared, and it makes some sense.
Yeah.
You're putting your brand, like you work with some of the biggest brands in the world, and so those brands, by nature, those tech brands, are going to be nervous about putting their brand in the hands of a creator and letting them talk on their behalf.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of like the rub, in that best brands will lean in and just kind of have to trust it. But I get why they're scared, because if you're talking about the Googles, the Samsungs of the world, they have probably 3 or 4 different agencies that are just managing just their influencer marketing and trying to make sure they hit their points exactly.
Yeah, and even like the different regions and like the communications that have to go through. So a lot of times when the instructions been passed down from like the main office, the amount of change that can happen between that and the agency is very little. So to play it safe, I guess like on all parties, they're trying to follow the terms. But yeah, I think a lot of times even like very minor changes that we've been requesting to push back on a little bit. Like over the years, there's so many stories of like integrations that we have done that we felt like could have been more effective for the brand if we had done it a certain way, but there was just no way to change it, no matter how bad we tried to push back on it. Would you say a banner ad on YouTube is more or less effective than paying for a actual banner ad on like Facebook or Google?
It's tough because like even if you work with a top creator and you have a really prescriptive ad, it will still do pretty well. But it'll probably be cheaper overall if you did Instagram, an Instagram ad or a Facebook ad. I think, yeah, I mean, for us, it was, if there was like a step change, like it was a top growth channel for SeatGeek when we were kind of had a more prescriptive approach, and then it became one of the top just marketing channels at SeatGeek, which in the ticketing space, we're the only ticketing brand where influencer marketing is one of their top channels, let alone a channel at all. So for us, it's Google Ads and really influencer marketing, and that's kind of what's different about us than our competitors.
Do you think like the YouTube side of influencer marketing has kind of complemented the success on the banner ads, where people have already heard about the brand, they're familiar with it? Because what we've noticed is with certain types of products, people will buy it right away and the results are very measurable for the brand. But in the tech space, sometimes you're talking about a $2,000, $3,000, $6,000 computer, and it's not exactly an item where you would watch a YouTube video and at the end of it, you would 2 clicks and go and buy it or something like that. But I feel like our kind of push a lot of times is if there's a certain product that is seen in multiple videos and in multiple use cases, eventually the consumer ends up buying it after they become familiar with it, whether it's at Best Buy, Walmart, Staples, or wherever it is, instead of just like the whole, like the measurability of like a coupon code right away.
Yeah, I mean that's like one of the hardest issues to figure out in marketing is attribution, particularly what people call multi-touch attribution.
Yeah.
So like, I bet you there's so many sales where people hear you talk about this amazing computer, and then a month later, they're finally ready to buy the computer and they just buy it directly.
Yeah.
And so as a marketer, there's nothing more frustrating, particularly somebody who does influencer marketing, to know that like you should get credit for that. And that should be your trust and the top of the funnel that influencer marketing applies, contextualize every ad you see after that, right? Because every ad you see after that, they think of you, they think of your review, they think of why they should buy it.
Yeah.
But they ultimately clicked on that Facebook ad or that Google ad because they finally were ready to actually make the purchase decision. And so that's what I think I definitely feel for a lot of brands who are trying, particularly the big ones, because how do you figure that out? And there's a lot of companies that try to do it, but it's one of the hardest, things
Yeah.
to figure out in marketing.
Yeah, we see like a lot of times the Google links, they'll track like who visited the page, how much time they spent on it. I know like Dbrand Skins is one of the companies that was not really well known when I first started on YouTube. And then they kind of went with a unique strategy. It was like a small company when it started, and they tried things that other companies hadn't before. And now they've become one of the most widespread tech sponsors in the space, like Marquez, Unbox Therapy, and everybody. It's almost essentially like SeatGeek, but in the tech industry. I feel like every other video we do see that, and there's like a big giveaway. Most of the time, it's a Dbrand related. But yeah, that's the thing that we always have to talk to brands about. Like even for expensive items, a lot of times they'll do like a coupon code, and like here's $10 off on a $2,000 computer that is brand new. And with like tech, people are very loyal too. If you're on a Mac, to try to switch to a Windows computer is tough. So a lot of times trying to push that is hard for the brand to measure, and the way they have to default a lot of times is just looking at the views, and the link clicks, and that's about it. One of the last questions I have is, what is like the single most effective platform in your opinion right now? I know you mentioned YouTube, and I personally agree with that as well. I think YouTube is the most complex platform. You have video, you have audio, you have the content. Watch time is very heavily measured. The algorithm is constantly changing. Instagram I've also found is to be a pretty effective platform as well. We found that like the rates, because of the YouTube following, have been significantly higher for our following size. I'm not really sure why a lot of times, but there's YouTube, there's Instagram, there's TikTok now, which I'm not really involved on. I just watched a lot of them. Don't really know how to use it or make anything on it. What would you say is like the most important platform? Maybe one of them that I just listed is not even part of what is the most effective out there. Maybe podcasts or.
To me, it's YouTube, and the reason I give is, I think the reasons you mentioned is, one, you get these very like we're looking for communities. We're not really looking for as much, like, views matter, but community is what makes people purchase, I believe, and makes people remember you. I think you got that in podcasts. I think what you're seeing though in podcast is the space has become more commoditized in the sense that there are some most podcasters are either represented by 4 to 5 agencies, and most brands are represented by 4 to 5 agencies. And that has created a very low barrier for brands to get in, which for some brands is great. For me, I view that as a problem because I am now competing against a much larger pool of ads. Whereas YouTube, what's great about YouTube for me is that it has not gotten commoditized. There are agents, there are agencies, but it's very decentralized. And so it's really about relationships and forming those relationships with influencers. And that's why I really love YouTube, is because if our competitors wanted to do it, they just couldn't log into a platform or partner with an agency and do it. They'd actually have to get into the emails, get into the DMs, and put in the hard work. And YouTube, to me, that it's still somewhat the wild, wild west, is awesome, because the minute a lot of social, like TikTok has an ads marketplace, Instagram is trying to do the same thing, YouTube will definitely try to do the same thing. Once every brand can do what we're doing, we got to find the next thing. Right now, YouTube is something that most brands struggle to wrap their heads around and struggle to understand how to make it work.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's just there's so many like different avenues, and it's weird how it's evolved over the years. And like in tech situation, we don't use Facebook essentially at all. Like nobody really posts on it regularly. I know it's like a platform that in like e-commerce is huge. It's essentially for where most people actually spend a lot of their budget if they're looking to buy ads. And like the comparison between Google and Facebook is often thrown around. But I think that's really interesting to hear. And thanks so much for providing your insight today. But otherwise, thank you guys so much for listening to this episode of the Featured Podcast. And if you guys enjoyed it, make sure you subscribe over on YouTube for the video experience, and also follow us on any platform that you choose to listen to podcasts on. And we'll see you guys in the next one.